The airport was busy that morning. People rushed in every direction with suitcases rolling behind them, announcements echoed through the speakers, and the smell of coffee filled the air. Among the many passengers was a young black girl named Maya. She was only 17, traveling alone for the first time on such a long trip. Her father had arranged everything for her because he wanted her to experience the world and grow in confidence. She was nervous but excited, holding tightly to her boarding pass that clearly showed her seat was in first class. Maya was not dressed in fancy clothes. She wore a simple hoodie, jeans, and sneakers. She carried a backpack with a book and some snacks. Unlike many first-class travelers who often carried designer bags or wore business suits, she looked like an ordinary student. But she had every right to be there. Her father had purchased the best ticket for her, not because she asked for it, but because he believed she deserved comfort and safety. She walked toward the gate, handed over her boarding pass, and entered the aircraft with a smile of nervous excitement. Inside the plane, first class looked stunning. Wide leather seats stretched out like small private rooms. Each had its own screen, extra space, and even a menu with meals prepared by a chef. Maya's eyes widened. She had never seen anything like this before. She quietly walked to her seat, placed her bag down, and sat with a mix of relief and excitement. She thought about texting her father to say she was on board, but before she could, a sharp voice interrupted her. It was the flight attendant, a tall woman with perfectly tied hair and a stiff smile. She looked at Maya with a questioning expression, as if something was wrong. "Excuse me, miss," she said, "are you sure you're in the right seat?" Her tone was polite on the surface, but underneath, it carried doubt and suspicion. Maya looked up nervously and nodded. "Yes, this is my seat." "See." She held up her boarding pass, showing the seat number clearly printed in bold letters. The attendant glanced at it quickly but frowned. Her eyes then scanned Maya's clothes, her small backpack, and her young face. The attendant muttered, "First class is for premium passengers only. Are you sure you didn't take the wrong turn? Economy is at the back of the plane." Maya felt her stomach twist. She had been excited only moments earlier, but now her heart pounded with embarrassment. She tried again, speaking softly, "This is the seat on my ticket. I think it's correct." But the attendant didn't move away. Instead, she leaned closer, as if trying to make Maya feel even smaller. "These seats are very expensive, you know," she added, her voice a little louder this time so that nearby passengers could hear. A few people turned their heads. Some looked at Maya with sympathy, while others simply watched with curiosity. Maya's cheeks grew warm. She wanted to disappear. She had done nothing wrong, yet she was being treated as if she didn't belong. She held the ticket tighter in her hand and repeated, "This is really my seat." But the attendant shook her head slightly, still not convinced. "Let me double check," she said, as if she didn't believe a word Maya said. She snatched the boarding pass gently but firmly, studying it again. The seat number matched perfectly with the one Maya was sitting in. Yet the attendant's expression did not soften. Instead, she gave a tight smile and said, "There must be some mistake in the system. People don't usually get seated here unless," her voice trailed off, leaving the sentence unfinished. Maya understood the meaning behind the pause. The woman thought she didn't look like she belonged in first class. Maya could feel her throat closing. She wanted to stand up and leave just to escape the stares, but something inside told her not to. She remembered her father's words before she left home, "Always know your worth. You belong wherever your feet take you, as long as you walk with honesty." Those words gave her strength. She remained seated, even as the attendant sighed loudly and told another crew member that she might need to move this passenger. The second attendant walked over, looked at Maya's ticket, and nodded politely. "It matches," she said quietly, "this is her seat." but the first attendant still looked unconvinced. "Well, we'll see what the captain says," she muttered, clearly irritated. She then turned to Maya and said in a voice loud enough for others to hear, "You'll have to wait until we confirm this. Don't get too comfortable." Passengers nearby exchanged looks. One elderly woman whispered to her husband, "She's treating that poor girl unfairly." Another man shook his head, clearly disapproving, but no one spoke up directly. Maya sat silently, her eyes fixed on her lap, trying not to let the tears escape. She was not angry, only deeply embarrassed. She wondered why kindness seemed so difficult for some people. All she had wanted was a peaceful journey. As the boarding process continued, more passengers filled the cabin. Maya felt each glance like a weight pressing down on her shoulders. She wished her father were there to protect her, to tell the attendant firmly that his daughter belonged exactly where she was sitting. But she was alone, and she needed to be strong. She reached for her phone, typed a short message to her father, "They don't believe my seat is real." The attendant said, "I don't belong here." She hesitated before pressing send, worried about troubling him, but finally sent it. The attendant returned after a few minutes with the boarding pass in hand. She gave it back to Maya but with no apology. "Just stay put for now," she said coldly, "but don't be surprised if we ask you to move later." Then she walked away, leaving Maya stunned. The humiliation stung more than anything. Not even an apology, not even a smile. Just doubt and suspicion. Maya leaned back in her seat, trying to breathe slowly. She looked out of the window, watching the luggage being loaded below. She reminded herself that she had done nothing wrong. She had her ticket, her seat, and her right to be there. Still, the pain of being judged so quickly, without a chance to prove herself, cut deep. She thought of how many others must have faced the same treatment in different ways, judged by appearance instead of truth. The thought made her both sad and determined. As the plane prepared for takeoff, Maya whispered to herself, "I belong here. No one can take that from me." Her words were quiet, but they gave her courage. She knew her father would not let this go once he heard the full story. But for now, she sat silently, trying to hold her dignity together as the engines roared to life and the plane began to move. She did not know that everything was about to change when her father stepped on board. The plane had not yet taken off, but the tension in the first-class cabin was already heavy. Maya sat stiffly in her seat, her ticket clutched tightly in her hand, even though the attendant had already returned it. She kept her eyes on the small screen in front of her, pretending to read the menu, but her mind was too unsettled. She could feel the eyes of other passengers on her. Some looked away quickly when she glanced up, but others continued to watch with curiosity, as if waiting for more drama to unfold. The flight attendant who had questioned her earlier was not finished. She returned, this time with her arms crossed, and spoke in a louder voice than before. "Miss, I need you to be honest with me. First-class tickets are not usually assigned to, well, students." She let her eyes sweep over Maya's hoodie and sneakers, then added, "We cannot allow any mistakes before we take off." Her words carried no kindness, only suspicion. Maya's heart pounded faster. She swallowed hard and tried to keep her voice calm. "I told you already. This is my seat. My father bought it for me." But the attendant only smirked and raised her eyebrows. "Your father bought it for you," she repeated, her tone mocking. "Well, unless your father is a billionaire, I don't see how this is possible. Why don't you just make things easier and go to economy before the captain has to get involved?" The words hit Maya like a stone. She felt her throat tighten, and her eyes grew watery, but she forced herself not to cry. She had promised her father she would travel bravely and with dignity. She sat straighter and said firmly, "I'm not moving. This is my seat." Her small voice, though quiet, carried strength. The exchange had now caught the attention of almost every passenger in the first-class cabin. An older man in a suit leaned forward and whispered to his wife, "This doesn't look right. She clearly has a ticket." The wife nodded, shaking her head in disapproval. A young woman across the aisle pulled out her phone, as if she wanted to record what was happening, but then hesitated. The air was thick with discomfort. Everyone could see the unfairness, but no one wanted to step into the conflict directly. The attendant sighed dramatically and turned to her colleague again. "She refuses to move. Can you call the captain?" The second attendant, who had earlier confirmed the ticket, looked troubled. "But her seat matches. She has the right ticket." The first attendant frowned. "There has to be a mistake. Someone like her wouldn't normally be seated here. I know what I'm doing." Her confidence was cold and unshakable. Maya sat frozen as the second attendant reluctantly walked toward the cockpit. She could hear murmurs around her. Some passengers whispered words of support under their breath, but others simply shook their heads, unwilling to challenge the crew. For Maya, each passing second felt like an hour. She wondered if they would really force her to leave the seat she had every right to occupy. Her phone buzzed in her lap. She quickly looked down and saw a reply from her father. "Stay calm. Don't argue. I'll take care of this. I'm boarding soon." Relief washed through her like a gentle wave. She didn't know exactly what he planned, but she trusted him completely. She held onto his words like a lifeline. The attendant returned once again, her patience thinner than ever. She placed her hands on her hips and addressed Maya in front of everyone. "Miss, I'm asking you one last time. Get up and move to economy before this becomes an even bigger issue." Her voice was sharp, and this time, she made sure to project it loudly so the entire cabin could hear. Maya's cheeks burned with embarrassment. She wanted to disappear, to sink into the wide seat and hide from every pair of eyes that were now focused on her. But she didn't move. Her father's words replayed in her mind, "Always know your worth." Slowly, she lifted her chin and said softly, "I am not moving. This is my seat." The room fell quiet. The silence that followed was almost heavier than the attendant's words. A few people clapped lightly, trying to encourage her, but they quickly stopped when the attendant glared at them. The atmosphere was electric, filled with unspoken thoughts and quiet tension. The captain finally appeared, called by the second attendant. He was a middle-aged man with a professional smile that faded when he saw the situation. "What seems to be the problem here?" he asked. The attendant wasted no time. "Captain, this passenger is in the wrong seat. She insists she belongs here, but as you can see, there must be a mistake." She gestured toward Maya as if presenting evidence. The captain looked at Maya kindly, then at her ticket. He scanned the barcode with a small device and frowned. "This ticket is valid. Seat 2A. That is exactly where she's sitting." His tone was firm. A small wave of whispers spread through the cabin. The truth was clear now, but the attendant still refused to back down. "There must be a glitch," she said quickly. "She's too young. This isn't the kind of passenger we usually have here." The captain's eyes narrowed slightly. "With respect, it's not our job to decide what kind of passenger belongs here. If her ticket is correct, she stays. End of discussion." Maya's heart lifted slightly. Finally, someone had stood up for her. She gave the captain a small, grateful nod. But even then, the damage was done. She could still feel the sting of humiliation, the weight of being doubted and judged in front of strangers. The captain turned back toward the cockpit, and the second attendant resumed helping passengers settle. But the first attendant was still clearly unhappy. She leaned closer to Maya and whispered, "Don't think this is over. Just stay quiet and don't cause trouble." Then she walked away, leaving Maya shaken. Though the situation had calmed on the surface, the cabin was not the same. Passengers glanced at Maya with mixed expressions, some sympathetic, some simply curious. Maya sat quietly, trying to steady her breathing. She pulled out her book, opened it, and stared at the words, though she couldn't concentrate. What she didn't know was that everything was about to change. Just as the cabin door was about to close, another important passenger boarded the plane. A tall man in an elegant but simple suit walked in, carrying a leather briefcase. He moved with calm authority, his steps measured and confident. His face was familiar to some, though most didn't recognize him right away. For Maya, relief spread instantly across her face. Her father had arrived. She quickly closed her book, stood slightly from her seat, and whispered, "Dad." He gave her a reassuring smile and placed a gentle hand on her shoulder. "Don't worry, I'm here now." The first attendant noticed him and approached, assuming he was just another passenger. "Sir, please take your seat quickly. We've had some problems already." She gestured toward Maya as if pointing out the source of the issue. "Your daughter seems to think she belongs in first class. We've had quite the scene." The father looked at Maya with calm eyes, then back at the attendant. He didn't say much, only, "She does belong here." His voice was deep, steady, and carried a weight that silenced the space around him. The attendant blinked, confused, not realizing who she was speaking to. Maya leaned against her seat, finally able to breathe a little easier. She didn't know what her father planned to do, but she knew this was only the beginning of something far bigger than anyone expected. The cabin grew quiet as Maya's father took his seat beside her. He moved with a calm dignity that made people notice, even if they didn't recognize him yet. His presence was steady, like a shield that instantly gave Maya comfort. She leaned back in her seat, her small hands gripping the armrest, and for the first time since boarding, she felt safe. He gave her a soft smile and whispered, "You did well. I'm proud of you." Those words were enough to bring tears to her eyes, but she quickly blinked them away, not wanting to show weakness in front of the passengers who had just witnessed her humiliation. The first attendant, however, did not feel any need to change her tone. She walked up to Maya's father with her usual air of authority and said in a clipped voice, "Sir, I need to make you aware of a situation. This young lady has been occupying the seat without proper confirmation. We've been trying to resolve it, but she refuses to move to economy. It has been disruptive." She gestured at Maya with a tilt of her chin, as though presenting evidence. Maya's father turned his head slowly, his eyes resting on the woman. His expression was calm, but behind it there was a kind of quiet power. He did not raise his voice, nor did he rush to defend his daughter with anger. Instead, he asked one simple question. "Did you check her ticket carefully?" The attendant lifted her chin. "Yes, but with all respect, sometimes tickets are mistakenly assigned. She doesn't appear to be the type of passenger who would be seated here." The choice of words made a few nearby passengers shift uncomfortably in their seats. Everyone knew what she meant, though she didn't say it directly. She judged Maya by her appearance, her clothes, and perhaps even her skin. Maya's father didn't respond right away. He adjusted his suit jacket, placed his briefcase neatly by his feet, and looked at his daughter again before speaking. "Her ticket is valid. She belongs here as much as anyone else. That should be enough for you." His voice was low, steady, but it carried across the cabin. Several passengers nodded silently, agreeing with him. The attendant seemed unsettled for a moment, but her pride would not let her back down. She pressed her lips together and said, "I'll escalate this matter to the captain again. It's my duty to protect the standards of this cabin." With that, she turned sharply and walked away. Maya's father exhaled slowly, as though he had seen such moments many times before. He turned to Maya and said softly, "Sometimes people judge before they understand. But remember, their judgment does not define you. Only you define who you are." His words settled into Maya's heart, filling her with strength. She nodded, whispering, "Thank you, Dad." Meanwhile, whispers ran through the cabin. A man in the back row of first class leaned toward another passenger and said quietly, "Who is he? The way he carries himself, he looks important." Another nodded, noticing his composed presence. But no one knew the truth yet, that the man sitting beside the girl was not just important, but the very person who controlled the airline they were flying on. The captain returned to the cabin soon after, his face serious. He spoke quietly to the first attendant, who had summoned him again. They stood near the curtain separating first class from the rest of the plane. The captain looked frustrated, shaking his head as he checked the ticket once more. Passengers could hear fragments of the conversation. "It's valid," he said firmly. "Stop insisting otherwise." The attendant's face flushed, but she continued to argue. Maya's father watched calmly, saying nothing yet. He knew there would be a moment when silence would speak louder than confrontation. He had built his life on patience, discipline, and the belief that the right moment always revealed itself. As the argument at the front of the cabin carried on, Maya rested her head against the seat and whispered to her father, "Why do people treat others this way?" He brushed her hair gently away from her face and answered, "Because they don't see the whole picture. They see only what they want to see. But soon, the picture will change." His words puzzled her, but she trusted him completely. The tension didn't escape the other passengers. A few started to mumble about complaining to the airline after landing. "This isn't how first-class service should be," one woman said firmly to her husband. Another man, a businessman with a laptop on his lap, muttered, "If they treat one passenger like this, how many others face the same thing?" People were no longer just watching, they were forming quiet opinions about the service they were seeing. The first attendant returned, her voice tight but forced into a professional smile. She looked at Maya's father and said, "Sir, I hope you understand, we have procedures to follow. This cabin has standards, and we can't allow mistakes." She emphasized the word standards, as if it excused her behavior. This time, Maya's father spoke a little louder, so the surrounding passengers could hear. "The standard you should be following is respect. My daughter showed you her ticket, yet you treated her as though she didn't belong here. That is not service. That is judgment." His tone was calm, but his words struck like a bell in the quiet cabin. Several passengers murmured in agreement. The attendant stiffened, clearly unsettled by the man's composure. She didn't know how to respond. She simply nodded quickly and stepped back, though her face betrayed her frustration. The plane began to prepare for takeoff, and the cabin lights dimmed slightly. Maya's father leaned back in his seat, his arm resting protectively on the armrest between them. He looked out the window for a moment, then closed his eyes briefly, as though lost in thought. Maya studied his calm face, wondering how he stayed so steady in moments like this. As the engines roared to life, the captain made an announcement welcoming everyone on board. His voice carried the usual warmth, but for those who had witnessed the scene earlier, the words felt slightly hollow. Maya glanced around and noticed that a few passengers were still looking at her, but now their expressions were different, less doubtful, more supportive. The flight attendant who had caused the trouble moved quietly through the aisle, checking seat belts and trays. When she passed Maya and her father, she avoided their eyes. She looked nervous, though she tried to mask it with a professional smile. Maya's father noticed, but he said nothing. He understood that sometimes silence carried more weight than an argument. Once the plane was in the air, dinner service began. Maya looked at the menu, still a little shaken, but her father encouraged her to choose something she liked. She picked a simple meal, while he ordered tea. As they ate, the mood in the cabin slowly relaxed. Conversations picked up again, laughter could be heard here and there, and the earlier tension seemed to fade. But for Maya, the memory of being humiliated in front of strangers was still fresh. She spoke softly so only her father could hear. It hurt, Dad. She looked at me like I didn't belong, like I wasn't good enough. Her father placed his hand gently over hers. You belong wherever your honesty, your dignity, and your ticket say you belong. Remember, people may try to take that from you, but they cannot succeed if you stand firm. She nodded, his words sinking into her heart. She realized then that her father's calm strength was not just for himself, it was for her too. He was teaching her to face the world with grace, even when the world was unfair. What neither she nor the passengers knew was that the truth about her father's identity was about to be revealed in a way that no one could ignore. Soon, the very airline staff who doubted her would learn that the man sitting quietly in seat 2B was not just another passenger, he was the one who signed their paychecks, the one who owned the wings carrying them across the sky. But for now, Maya sat beside her father in the soft glow of the cabin lights, unaware that the story of this flight was only beginning. The night sky stretched endlessly outside the airplane windows, dotted with stars that seemed close enough to touch. Inside the first-class cabin, however, the air still felt heavy. Passengers were quietly eating, some watching movies, others trying to sleep. But many could not forget what had happened before takeoff. Every so often, a pair of eyes glanced toward Maya and her father, curious about the quiet man who had defended his daughter so calmly. Something about him felt different, though no one could quite explain why. The flight attendant who had caused the problem earlier was now quieter than before. She moved quickly between seats, her smile fixed, but her eyes showed unease. She tried to act as though nothing had happened, but her actions betrayed her discomfort. Whenever she walked past Maya's row, she avoided looking directly at the girl or her father. The other passengers noticed this change, and whispers slowly spread. Maya leaned back in her seat, finally beginning to relax beside her father. His calm presence was like an anchor keeping her steady. She sipped her juice, watching him as he sat reading a small document he had taken from his briefcase. To anyone else, it looked like ordinary paperwork, but Maya knew her father's documents often carried weighty decisions. "Dad," she whispered softly, careful not to disturb others. "Why didn't you tell her who you are? Why didn't you just end it right away?" Her father closed the folder and gave her a thoughtful look. "Because, Maya, sometimes the truth has more power when it reveals itself at the right moment. If I had told her earlier, she might have dismissed it or thought I was exaggerating. But when the truth comes from where she cannot deny it, it will teach her more than my words ever could." Maya thought about his answer and nodded slowly. It reminded her of the times he had told her that patience was stronger than anger. Still, part of her wished he had spoken up sooner to stop the humiliation she had endured. But she trusted his wisdom, even when she didn't fully understand it yet. As the cabin settled, the captain made an announcement, his voice warm and professional. "Ladies and gentlemen, we are cruising smoothly at 35,000 feet. Tonight, we have the honor of carrying a very special guest on board. Our airline's chief executive officer is traveling with us. Please join me in extending him a warm welcome." The cabin went still. Forks froze in midair, conversations halted, and eyes darted from seat to seat. A murmur ran through the passengers. Some whispered in surprise, others exchanged looks of excitement. The CEO of the airline? Here, on this very flight. First class erupted in quiet curiosity. People began scanning the cabin, wondering who it could be. Maya's father sat quietly, his eyes on his daughter. He did not move, he did not smile, he simply waited. Then the captain himself stepped out from behind the curtain. He walked down the aisle until he stopped in front of Maya's father. His voice carried both respect and formality as he said, "Mr. Johnson, it is an honor to have you with us tonight. Please let us know if there is anything you need." The cabin gasped. Heads turned sharply. Mouths fell open. Whispers exploded around the seats. Maya's father, the man who had been sitting quietly all this time, who had been treated as just another passenger, was not just anyone. He was the CEO. He owned the airline. He was the one who set the policies, approved the training, and carried the responsibility for every single flight under the company's name. The first attendant froze where she stood. Her face turned pale as the realization crashed over her. The man she had doubted, the girl she had humiliated, he was her ultimate boss. Her legs felt weak, and for a moment, she couldn't move. She replayed her actions in her mind, the sharp tone, the refusal to believe, the insistence that Maya didn't belong. Each memory burned her with shame. Passengers, on the other hand, reacted with amazement. One man leaned toward his wife and whispered, "Can you believe it? That's him. That's the owner of the whole airline." Another woman shook her head in disbelief, muttering, "The way they treated his daughter, this is going to be a story." Some even smiled with a sense of justice, knowing that the arrogant attendant had just placed herself in the worst possible situation. The captain gave a polite nod and returned to the cockpit, leaving the cabin buzzing with whispers. Maya turned to her father, her eyes wide. "Now she knows," she whispered. He smiled gently at her and squeezed her hand. "The truth always finds its way." The first attendant finally gathered enough courage to approach. Her hands trembled slightly as she smoothed her uniform. She forced a nervous smile, though her voice quivered. "Mr. Johnson, I did not realize. I mean, I didn't know." Maya's father lifted his hand slightly, cutting her off, but in a calm and respectful way. "You don't need to explain to me. What you need to do is think about how you treated my daughter. A ticket is a ticket. Respect should not depend on how someone looks, or what they wear, or how old they are. That is the standard I expect in this airline." His voice was not angry, but it was steady and firm, carrying the authority of a leader who had built his life on fairness. The attendant's eyes filled with tears. She nodded quickly, whispering, "Yes, sir. You're right. I was wrong." She stepped back, unable to meet Maya's eyes. The other passengers sat in silence, impressed by the father's calm handling of the situation. He had every right to shout, to demand her removal on the spot, but he chose to teach instead. His words carried more weight than any punishment could. Maya sat quietly, absorbing every moment. She felt both proud and relieved. Proud of her father for the way he carried himself with such grace, and relieved that the truth was finally revealed. The humiliation she had felt earlier seemed to fade, replaced with dignity. She realized now that her father's patience was not weakness, it was strength. Dinner service resumed slowly, though the atmosphere in the cabin had completely changed. The other passengers treated Maya with newfound respect. Some even gave her small nods or warm smiles as if to say, "You belong here." The whispers of doubt were gone. In their place was admiration for the quiet man who had revealed himself not through anger, but through patience. The first attendant remained shaken. Every time she passed Maya's row, her steps quickened, and her eyes stayed down. She was consumed with regret, but she also knew that this was a lesson she would never forget. Maya's father leaned back in his seat, finally sipping his tea. He looked at his daughter and said softly, "You see, Maya, the world will always have people who judge quickly. But the world also has truth, and truth has its own timing. Tonight, you learned that your worth does not depend on anyone's opinion. It is already yours." Maya smiled for the first time since boarding. The sting of earlier humiliation was replaced with a warm sense of belonging. She held her father's words close, knowing they would guide her far beyond this flight. The rest of the cabin slowly returned to normal, but the story of what had happened would stay with everyone present. They had witnessed not just the revelation of a powerful man's identity, but also the quiet lesson he delivered: respect should never be optional. The hours passed quietly as the plane crossed through the night sky. The hum of the engines became like background music, steady and calming, but inside Maya's heart there was still a storm of emotions. She leaned back in her seat, staring at the small screen in front of her, but she wasn't really watching. Her mind kept going back to the humiliation she had faced before her father arrived, the suspicious looks, the raised voice of the flight attendant, the way people had whispered around her. And then she remembered the moment of truth, when the captain had revealed who her father really was. That memory made her sit a little taller. It wasn't about power or money, it was about justice, about dignity. Her father sat beside her, calm as always. He had taken out a notepad and was writing, his pen moving slowly and thoughtfully across the page. Maya tilted her head and asked softly, "Dad, what are you writing?" He smiled without looking up. "Just some thoughts. Lessons to remember. Every moment teaches us something if we pay attention." He closed the notepad and looked at her directly. "Do you know what today taught us?" Maya hesitated, then answered, "That people can be unfair." Her father nodded gently. "Yes, but more importantly it taught us that respect is the highest standard, higher than money, higher than class. Without respect, none of the comforts around us mean anything." He reached for his tea and sipped slowly, his words sinking into her like seeds planted in rich soil. The passengers in first class, though quieter now, hadn't forgotten either. Some gave Maya and her father respectful nods whenever they passed by their row, as if silently apologizing for not stepping in earlier. Others seemed deep in thought, reflecting on what they had witnessed. The moment had left a mark on everyone, not just on Maya or the flight attendant. The attendant herself was a shadow of her earlier confidence. She moved stiffly down the aisle, her smile mechanical. When she served Maya and her father their dessert, her hands trembled slightly. She placed the plates down carefully and whispered, "I'm sorry." Her voice was so low that only they could hear. Maya looked at her father, waiting for him to respond. He gave the woman a small nod but did not say anything more. Sometimes silence was a stronger teacher than words. As the flight continued, Maya grew sleepy. The wide first-class seat turned into a bed, and she pulled the blanket up around her shoulders. Before closing her eyes, she whispered to her father, "I don't want to forget this. Even though it hurt, I want to remember." He brushed her forehead gently with his hand. "You will remember, Maya. And you will use it to become stronger, kinder, and wiser." When morning came and the sun began to rise outside the windows, the cabin stirred with movement. Breakfast was served, and people began to talk again, their voices carrying the relaxed energy of a new day. Maya felt refreshed but still thoughtful. She watched as the crew prepared for landing, the same attendant now quieter than she had been the entire flight. When the plane touched down and the passengers clapped softly in relief, the captain made another announcement. "Ladies and gentlemen, thank you for flying with us. We hope you enjoyed your journey. We would also like to once again acknowledge the presence of our CEO, Mr. Johnson, on this flight. His leadership reminds us that respect and service are the heart of our airline." The words were clear, intentional, and they carried across the cabin like a final lesson. As passengers gathered their belongings, many approached Maya's father with words of respect. A businessman shook his hand, saying, "I've traveled on your airline for years, sir. Tonight, I was reminded why I continue to choose it." Another woman leaned toward Maya and said softly, "You were very brave, young lady. Don't ever doubt yourself again." Maya smiled shyly, her heart warming at the kindness. The first attendant finally gathered her courage and approached. Her face was pale, her eyes nervous, but she stood tall and spoke clearly. "Mr. Johnson, I want to apologize directly. I treated your daughter unfairly. I judged her by her appearance instead of respecting her as a passenger. I take full responsibility." Her words were heavy, and she struggled to hold back tears. Maya's father looked at her carefully before responding. I accept your apology, but remember, an apology is only the beginning. True change happens when you carry the lesson forward, when you treat every passenger, no matter how they look, with the respect they deserve. That is the standard I expect in this airline. That is the standard our world needs. His words were gentle, but they carried weight. The attendant nodded quickly, whispering, "Yes, sir. I understand." As Maya and her father stepped off the plane, the atmosphere was different from when they boarded. People smiled at them, some even whispered quietly, "That's him, the CEO," as they walked by. But for Maya, it wasn't about the attention or the status. It was about the lesson she had learned. Respect could not be bought with money, nor earned by power. It was something everyone deserved, no matter who they were. Later, news of the incident reached the airline's headquarters. A full report was made, and new training programs for the staff were introduced. The company emphasized respect, equality, and professionalism, using the story as a powerful example. The airline promised that no passenger would ever have to experience what Maya had gone through again. For Maya, life went back to normal, but her heart was changed. She no longer felt nervous about traveling alone. Instead, she carried herself with quiet strength, remembering her father's words, "Your worth does not depend on anyone's opinion. It is already yours." On the day she returned home, she told her friends about the experience. They listened wide-eyed as she explained how the flight attendant had doubted her, how embarrassed she had felt, and how her father had revealed himself at the right moment. One of her friends asked, "Weren't you angry?" Maya smiled softly and shook her head. "I was hurt, yes. But I learned something more important. Anger fades, but respect lasts forever. And respect is something I'll never let anyone take from me again." Her father, watching her speak with such wisdom, felt a swell of pride. The experience had not broken her spirit, it had shaped it. He knew that one day, when she faced the challenges of the world on her own, she would carry this lesson with her. And so, what began as a painful humiliation on an airplane turned into a story of dignity, patience, and truth. A young girl discovered her strength. A father showed the world that true power is quiet, steady, and rooted in respect. And an entire cabin of passengers went home with a lesson they would never forget, that no matter who you are, where you come from, or how you look, respect is the one ticket everyone deserves.